Good morning. This is the second Sunday of our new church year, and we're so glad you've chosen to tune in with us today on this beautiful but cool Sunday. We have our new Zoom format, so please put your device onto the speaker view for the best visual experience. And follow along with our PowerPoint as we now begin our service. Welcome to this congregation where we seek to foster community, to grow our spirits, to serve others, and to work for justice. We're glad that you've joined us this morning in our sacred cyberspace, and we hope you will experience love, acceptance, and inspiration. After the service, please join us for our Zoom coffee hour. We continue with the monthly touchstone themes, which give our Sunday services a guiding foundation. This church year's overarching theme is deepening connections, which is needed now more than ever. Our monthly themes strive to help us shape our days and guide our journey. The September topic is worth and dignity. This assertion leads to treating even those with whom we disagree with respect and compassion. Today's sermon will be from Emily Quarles-Mowrer. Emily is the child of a UU minister and has been preaching sermons of her own since 2006. She currently lives in Gilbertsville, Pennsylvania, with her husband, her 2 daughters, 4 cats, and 1 very outnumbered dog. Her sermon title today is Poison at the Root. English novelist Anthony Trollope said, "When the ivy has found its tower, when the delicate creeper has found its strong wall, we know how the parasite plants grow and prosper." We all know that poison ivy is a difficult plant to conquer. A similar parasite plant was present at the founding of our country. What lessons can we bring from the garden to our wider community? Now let us enter into worship together. We have our musician extraordinaire, Avi Wisnia, to perform the prelude.
There's a land that I see where all people are free, and I say they far to this land from where we are. Take my hand, come with me, where all people are free. Come with me, take my hand, and we'll live in a land where the river runs free, in a land through the green country, in a land to the shining sea, and you and me are free to be, you and me. I see the land bright and clear, and the time's coming near when we'll live in this land, you and me, hand in hand. Take my hand, come along, lend your voice to my song. Come along, take my hand, sing a song. In a land where the river runs free, for a land through the green country, for a land to the shining sea, for a land where the horses run free, and you and me are free to be, you and me. Take my hand, come with me, where all people are free. Come with me, take my hand, and we'll run in a land where the river runs free, to a land with the green country, to a land
Love Avi. And now it is time for our chalice lighting. Hopefully you were able to log on before 10:30 so you could see all of our announcements. One of them was about asking for video volunteers, and it told about a new feature that we're starting just this morning. We're inviting our fellowship members to take part in the service by sending in videos of themselves lighting and extinguishing their chalice or candle while the appropriate words are read. You can find out more about it in the video on our UUFLB members page on Facebook. This morning, our chalice will be led, our reading will be led, and our chalice will be lit by Jeff Ellis.
We light our chalice this morning, grateful for the love we experience in this beloved community. May this flame light our way to inner peace, love for each other, and faith in ourselves.
Thank you, Jeff. Our opening words this morning are from Reverend Victoria Weinstein. To make our first principle into a spiritual practice requires us to honestly acknowledge that we have been programmed by our society to treasure and cherish certain kinds of people over others, and to see only a select few as bearing as much worth, value, and dignity as we ourselves have. The rest, we've been trained by many forces to regard as other. We are either afraid of that other, or we feel superior to that other, or almost as bad, we've learned to feel a kind of privileged pity or charity towards those others. Please spare us from that, most of all. And now our Director of Religious Exploration, Angela Konin, will share the message for all ages.
Good morning, friends. Has anybody ever unfairly told you that you couldn't do something you really wanted to do? It feels awful, doesn't it? Did you know that still today, some people are told they can't do certain things because of the color of their skin? Our story today is called Amazing Grace, and in this story, I want you to try and listen for those unfair things and think about how it makes you feel. And then I want you to pay attention to when Grace shares what happened with her grown-ups and how they react and help her through. I'm just going to share our screen and we can get started with Amazing Grace. Grace was a girl who loved stories. She didn't mind if they were read to her or told to her or made up in her own head. She didn't care if they were from books or movies or out of Nana's long memory. Grace just loved stories. And after she had heard them, and sometimes while they were still going on, Grace would act them out, and she always gave herself the most exciting part. Grace went into battle as Joan of Arc and wove a wicked web as Anansi the spider. She hid inside the wooden horse at the gates of Troy. She sailed the 7 seas with a peg leg and a parrot. She was Aladdin rubbing his magic lamp to make the genie appear, and Mowgli in the backyard jungle. Most of all, Grace loved to act out adventure stories and fairy tales. When there was no one else around, Grace played all the parts herself. She set out to seek her fortune, with no companion but her trusty cat, and found a city with streets paved in gold. Sometimes she could get Ma and Nana to join in when they weren't too busy. Then she was Dr. Grace, and their lives were in her hands. One day, Grace's teacher said they would do the play Peter Pan. Grace knew who she wanted to be. When she raised her hand, Raj said, "You can't be Peter. That's a boy's name." But Grace kept her hand up. "You can't be Peter Pan," whispered Natalie. "He isn't black." But Grace kept her hand up. "All right," said the teacher. "Lots of you want to be Peter Pan, so we'll have auditions next week to choose parts." She gave them words to learn. When Grace got home, she seemed sad. "What's the matter?" asked Ma. Raj said, "I couldn't be Peter Pan because I'm a girl." "That just shows what Raj knows," said Ma. "A girl can be Peter Pan if she wants to." Grace cheered up. Then later she remembered something else. "Natalie says I can't be Peter Pan because I'm black," she said. Ma looked angry. But before she could speak, Nana said, "It seems Natalie is another one who don't know nothing. You can be anything you want, Grace, if you put your mind to it." On Saturday, Nana told Grace they were going out. In the afternoon, they caught a bus and train into town. Nana took Grace to a grand theater. The sign outside read, "Rosalie Wilkins in Romeo and Juliet in sparkling lights." "Are we going to the ballet?" Nana asked Grace. "We are, honey, but first I want you to look at this picture." Grace looked up and saw a beautiful young ballerina in a tutu. Above the dancer, it said, "Stunning New Juliet." "That one is little Rosalie from back home in Trinidad," said Nana. "Her granny and me, we grew up together on the island. She's always asking me, do I want tickets to see her Rosalie dance? So this time I said yes." After the ballet, Grace played the part of Juliet, dancing around her room in her imaginary tutu. "I can be anything I want," she thought. On Monday, the class met for auditions to choose who was best for each part. When it was Grace's turn to be Peter, she knew exactly what to do and all the words to say. She had been Peter Pan all weekend. She took a deep breath and imagined herself flying. When it was time to vote, the class chose Raj to be Captain Hook and Natalie to be Wendy. There was no doubt who would be Peter Pan. Everyone voted for Grace. "You were fantastic," whispered Natalie. The play was a big success, and Grace was an amazing Peter Pan. After it was all over, she said, "I feel as if I could fly all the way home." "You probably could," said Ma. "Yes," said Nana. "If Grace put her mind to it, she can do anything she wants." And that's the end of our story. I'm just going to pull up the end here, and I hope you liked our story, and I hope you have a terrific week. I'll see you next time.
Now we have our interlude by Avi.
Standing in line, marking time, waiting for the welfare dime, 'cause they can't buy a job. And the man in the silk suit hurries by as he catches the poor old lady's eye. And just for fun, he says, "Get a job." That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. Yeah, that's just the way it is. Oh, don't you believe them? And said, "Hey little boy, you can go where the others go, 'cause you don't look like they do." I said, "Hey old man, how can you stand to think that way? Did you really think about it before you made the rules?" And he said, "Son, that's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. No, but don't you believe them?" Well, they passed a law in '64 to give those that ain't got a little more. But it only goes so far, because the law in another's mind, when all it sees at the hiring time is a line on the color bar. That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. Yeah, yeah, that's just the way it is. No, don't you believe that?
Thank you, Avi. We're glad to have Emily Quarles-Mowrer here to give us a reading to ponder this morning. We can't hear you, Emily.
Sorry about that. I forgot to unmute. So good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you all today. The story that I've brought this morning, the reading I've brought, is by Faye Mogensen, and the source is Ancient Stories for Modern Times. Although I personally got it off the UUA's website. The story is called Sister Goose and the Foxes. And I thought that this story is even more appropriate than when I originally saw it, because we've lost the great RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and just makes me so sad. All right, Sister Goose and the Foxes. Sister Goose swam in the pond as happy as could be. Now and then she ducked her head down to nibble a little bit here, nibble a little bit there. She took no more than her fill of those succulent underwater plants, for she knew that the pond belonged to everyone. Meanwhile, Brother Fox was hiding in the willows at the far end of the pond. He didn't like to see anyone happy, least of all a goose. Sister Goose swam along, enjoying the clear blue sky and the bright sunshine. She swam along to the willows growing at the far end of the pond. All of a sudden, Brother Fox sprang right out of those willows, shouting, "Trespasser, you get off my lake!" Sister Goose shrugged up her wings and looked at Brother Fox, mystified. "Trespasser? How so? This lake does not belong to you. It belongs to us all." Brother Fox didn't seem to hear her. He carried on, "You've been eating some plants in this pond. They don't belong to you. If you don't get out of this lake, I'm going to take you to court." Sister Goose was truly perplexed. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but she could see the ugly gleam in Brother Fox's eyes that she wouldn't be able to convince him. Instead, she said, "I'm not afraid to go to court over this. At least there, justice will be served." And so they went to court. But when Sister Goose arrived at the courthouse, she was very surprised. The clerks, who sat just inside the door, were both foxes. Inside the courtroom, she saw that the lawyers were foxes, and the judge was a fox, and even the jurors, although some of them had red fur and some of them had brown fur and some of them had silver fur, were all foxes too. Sister Goose was quaking as she entered the defendant's booth. Sure enough, though her arguments were sound, the judge and the jury found her guilty. They convicted her and turned her into stew. That is how it goes. There isn't much justice for the likes of a goose when the folks in the courthouse are all foxes.
Aw, thank you, Emily. We have a new way to donate to our split plate via an online link. You can find this link in this morning's UUFLB e-blast or in our Zoom chat. So now the recipient for our split plate collection for September will go to AHTN, Advocates for the Homeless and Those in Need. They provide the almost daily Wheels to Meals program that enables the hungry to get access to food, as well as the Code Blue program, which provides people a place to stay when it gets cold outside. People are suffering more now due to the consequences of COVID. Things may get worse before they get better. So please donate with your heart. And again, you can always mail your split plate donation to the fellowship office or try the new online link inside your Zoom chat. Today's sermon, titled Poison at the Root, from Emily.
And this time I remember to unmute. Poison at the roots. When I first moved into my house, there was a stand of poison ivy growing up the wall next to the basement door. I ignored it for a while. Poison ivy is a hardy plant, and this stand had been allowed to grow for so long that some of the vines were as thick as my fingers. This would not be an easy thing to remove. One morning, as I stood looking out at the back window in my kitchen, I noticed that a little spine of green was snaking out of the woodwork underneath the trim. The ivy was no longer an outdoor problem. It was slowly creeping into my house. So I couldn't put it off any longer, and that Saturday, I gathered up some big black trash bags. I put on my long pants. I put on a long sleeve t-shirt and thick gardening gloves with thin rubber gloves underneath. And piece by piece, I stripped the poison ivy off of the wall. Some pieces were big and had to be cut with shears or sawed off with a little hacksaw. Some pieces were small and had grown up and through and in between the cracks in the wall. And you know, poison ivy is a climbing plant. Its roots find little imperfections in walls, and they dig in and they hold on. And pulling down that ivy left behind cracks that I would need to repair later. It had grown under my siding, and even though I tried to ease those vines from between the slats, that tough old plant had its roots in the insulation in my walls. As gently as I tried to proceed, I still bent some siding and threw out some yellow tufts of insulation along with the runners. But at the end of the day, I triumphed over that ivy. I had filled several big black contractor trash bags and tied them tightly and left them to cook in the sun. But tearing out poison ivy did not leave me unscathed. Even though I had protected myself as best I could, wearing heavy clothing despite the summer sun, the urushiol oil released from those crushed stems and leaves had spattered over my exposed wrists and in places had even soaked into my clothing. And that shower I took with the special poison ivy soap was too late to prevent the itchy sores and blisters on my stomach and arms and legs. When I think of our beautiful United States of America, I often think of racism as the poison ivy growing up into our house. It was there at our founding, but our founders took its presence for granted. They let it grow unchecked until it grew up between the window frames, damaging the walls and the foundation, infiltrating the insulation, and hurting everyone it touched. In April of 1861, our nation began the process of tearing out the poison ivy that made a mockery of the notion that our country had been founded upon the principle that we are all created equal. The battle was long, it was hard fought, and an estimated 620,000 lives were sacrificed. But by May of 1865, the Civil War was over, and our house had been saved. Well, the thing about poison ivy is that you can cut down all the vines, but unless you've dug up the roots, the plant survives and it'll grow back. For 100 years, we ignored that poison ivy that grew up around us, both in the North and in the South. For 100 years, we let the poison of racism hurt everyone it touched. And then once again, in the 1960s, we looked up and we noticed that our house, our United States of America, had once again been overrun with poison ivy. We got together and we sang "We Shall Overcome" as we tore down those vines of racism. We marched and we demonstrated, we staged sit-ins and boycotts to fulfill our founders' promise of liberty and justice for all. And once again, we moved forward. But once again, the roots remained. I was not alive when my house was built. My house is from the 1950s. I wasn't there when the poison ivy took root under that basement window. The poison ivy isn't my fault. But once I bought the house, it became my responsibility, and the damage it caused became mine to fix. None of us was alive in 1619 when slavery took root in these United States. We did not choose to build our country on blood and bones. We cannot be held responsible for the sins of our forefathers. It's not our fault. But we live in this country now. We have inherited both the high ideals and the damage. And shaming one another over a past we have no control over will not help us move into a better future. In Kelsey Endura's 2019 article for Rewire, she references psychologist Mary Lania's work when she says, "Shame is only effective in changing behavior when it's followed up with an opportunity to learn from a mistake. Without this opportunity for recovery, shamed individuals are left with a small but dangerous armada of defense mechanisms: withdrawal, avoidance, and inflicting harm on themselves and on others." I bring this up because we talk a lot about Black Lives Matter. We talk a lot about every life mattering. And sometimes we don't hear one another. Some people say Black Lives Matter, and the person they're talking to hears, but yours doesn't. And some people say all lives matter, thinking that that is true, and it is true. But what people might hear is all lives matter, and so things should stay the same. And what Lamia suggests is that instead of shaming people, we can open a dialogue with them. The important parts of that dialogue begin with, "I am hurt. I am hurt by what you said." But even more important, we continue with a non-confrontational question, such as, what is it that you're trying to convey by saying that? It's much harder to react to an offense with vulnerability and an attempt to understand someone else who says something that hurts you. It's much harder to try to understand someone else's point of view than it is to react with hurt and with anger. What kind of world would we live in if we expected not just individuals, but even institutions and governments to adhere to the notion that we should treat all people with compassion? I look out across our country, our house, the first to be built upon the premise that we are all born with inalienable human rights. I see that we're not always up to the words of our founders. We still haven't quite secured the blessings of liberty for all of our citizens, and our justice is still employed unevenly. We're still dealing with the ivy. We're still dealing with the geese amongst the foxes. As Representative John Lewis said, there are still forces in America that want to divide us along racial lines, religious lines, lines of sex and class, but we have come too far. We have made too much progress to stop or to pull back. We must go forward, and I believe we will get there. I believe Representative Lewis was right. I too believe we will get there. But we will not get there by sowing more division. We cannot pull out the poison ivy of racism only to replace it with the poison oak of shame. Pulling poison ivy is hard and uncomfortable. Sometimes it's easier to tell yourself what you just saw was Virginia creeper, it wasn't poison ivy. Sometimes it's easier to blame someone who steps on the poison ivy hidden in the grass for being careless. It's easier to say, oh, it's only a few little leaves. They only cause a tiny little rash. They're not worth bothering anyone over. It's easier to say, oh, you know, I can't deal with it right now, but maybe tomorrow I'll come back and I'll get out my long pants and my gloves and my black plastic trash bags and my special soaps. It's easier to say, the next person to see it can take care of it. But as Lincoln said in the Gettysburg Address, it is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work. And the work goes on. I'd like to offer up a short prayer. Spirit of life and love, give us the wisdom to see the poison ivy of division. Give us the courage to take it out whenever we see it. And give us the compassion to care for all of those who are hurt by it. Blessed be. Amen.
Thank you, Emily. Oh my gosh, I think that was a great analogy. I really appreciate your words of wisdom. Now is the time in our service when we recognize and lift up one another in love. Let us be fully present and listen with open hearts. If there are joys and sorrows of those who could not join us today, they will be found in the chat, and we did not get any emails to that effect, so that we did not key anything into the chat. Maybe some of you did, though. If you wish to share something now verbally, please click on participants and then click raise hand, and you can be unmuted one by one. So we're going to look now for those raised hands. Which I'm not seeing any of, oddly.
Okay.
All right. Really, nobody has? Okay. Hold on. Hold on. Go ahead, Edwards.
Yes, the most wonderful person that I can think of, a woman. I used to pray Unitarian prayer for her for months, ever since I first was aware of her going to the hospital. And I prayed that she would fight it and come out, and she always did. Until this last time. I was so, I don't know, it seemed like the world had changed in one person. one person that was so important to our future, to the future of women and the future of our country. I think she meant democracy to me. She always did. And it'll take a long time for me to get over this. That's all.
Thank you. Nancy Harbin.
Hi, this is Jim. We just want to welcome Mary Rogers into our Zoom meeting. We've missed you, Mary, and just want to say hello.
Thank you. All right, if somebody sees somebody waving their hands wildly that we can't see, please put it in the chat and I can pick that up. Thank you, Donna. All right, I believe we have no more joys and sorrows to share. So thank you all.
Sherry?
Okay, Sonia?
Yes, I do have a concern. I live in a facility for people who are elderly, and we have been COVID-free for roughly a month, and we had moved into the green. Just this week, we are back in total red. We are confined to our rooms, and personally, I have been exposed to the COVID virus. That is my concern. That's it.
Oh my gosh, Sonia, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Me too. 6 months I avoided it and survived, and it just happened.
All right, thank you all for sharing. For the joys shared, we join you in celebration. And for the sorrows and concerns, may you feel our sympathy and our compassion. Let's pause for just a moment of gratitude, silent meditation, and prayer. We have our closing song from Avi.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves on mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may them create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may them create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come build a land where the mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come build the land, my people we seek. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God,
you, Avi. And we welcome back Jeff Ellis to Extinguish the Chalice. I can't.
We extinguish our chalice, but we keep its light in our heart. May it light our path as we leave this place and guide our way until we are together again.
Thank you, Jeff. And now